kava.
Gross.
It looks like a parfait. Do you remember when Kentucky Fried Chicken used to have those parfaits? Like a strawberry shortcake parfait?
Ugh. From KFC?
Yeah.
A parfait?
Did you ever fuck with KFC?
Maybe a little bit, but I more was a Popeyes gentleman.
Oh, we didn't have Popeyes in Portland until way later. Is this close enough to me?
Yeah, with your voice? Yeah, it's fucking.
Oh, is this by design?
Plenty close.
Is this good?
Yeah, I think this is fine. If you need it to pull it out more, you can.
Yeah, it's fine. I feel like it's probably. Anyway. They had like a strawberry shortcake parfait. It was very good for back then, for 80s fast food.
Yeah. And it looked like that?
Kind of, yeah.
Frothy.
It's got different layers.
Yeah, it's kind of gnarly when you mix kombucha with kava because it just gets real foamy.
Yeah, what makes you do that? You like the bubbles?
Yeah, I just like kombucha. I mean, I think coconut water with it is really good too, but something to kind of mask the bitterness, and kombucha just works good.
I like how we do a kava check-in every episode. We went to a kava bar in Wilmington, North Carolina, and that was not what I expected a kava bar to be. I expected a kava bar to be hippy-dippy, health conscious, singing bowls somewhere and some other healthy things. And it was a sketchy bar. No offense to anyone who goes there, but
yeah, it didn't.
It had an actual bar feel.
Yeah, it felt like a bar, but they, had kava, and they were like offering Shilajit in a jug. I guess it was like watered down Shilajit, but
then also anything you wanted to mix. They also had mud water, and so at first I'm like, cool. They have like stuff we're gonna like here, and they had stuff you liked because they had just jugs of kava. But I tried to get a mud water, which is another. I'm actually over that, but we have a lot of it here. It's a staple here. And I said, what do you have besides like dairy? Because I can't have dairy. And my options were oat milk that expired in July or Coffee Mate. It was Coffee Mate powdered non-dairy creamer with hot water.
Yeah, the options of mixers and things was crazy. When I tried to get, because a lot of the traditional way of doing kava, they put coconut water in it or juices, fresh juices and things like that. I mean, and then the real hardcores just shoot it basically. But and they had like little shots of it. But then I was like, can I get some kind of juice in it? And they're like, oh, we've got these like syrups. I was like,
yeah, it was like espresso syrups.
Like those Italian syrups.
Yeah.
And so he did give me one on the side. He was like, if you want to put that in. And I put like a little bit in. It was disgusting. It's not like, it's just like chemical or something.
Really?
But yeah, it was a little bit of a letdown, but it was good that we bought a jug that was really good. It was good straight kava. But the vibe of the bar was very weird.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about kava. I just assume, I guess projected onto it. I brought 4 drinks to this.
None of which are kava.
I've got a matcha latte that is actually cold now, and an electrolyte drink. This is that energy drink. And then I've got a water over here.
He's got all
I've
the
got
options.
an iPad. I have 2 separate pair of glasses. I've got the glasses to see you and then the glasses to see the iPad, which I also had to. I took 1 microdose this morning. I don't do microdoses very often, but I was feeling kind of not quite creative enough to talk. And I am such a lightweight. Like, I am so sensitive. Being sensitive is cool because I can like read people's energy and stuff, but I can also smell if someone used hand sanitizer 4 hours ago. And if I take...
Can you smell my feet right now?
I can't smell your feet right now.
They're gnarly.
Have you put chemicals on them? Because that's what I smell. I smell chemicals. No, I don't smell chemicals right now, but that's what I'm sensitive to, is the smell of of chemicals.
Well, I'm perspiring some kind of chemical from my foot that smells like fungus. It's argot. It's because of those wool shoes that you got me that are lovely. I love them, but I don't want to put socks on them. And if I just wear it, because they're kind of hot and warm, my feet sweat a lot in them. And I've worn them 4 or 5 times and they just smell like death.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. I've got a sweaty foot issue.
Is wool not
It's supposed to be. And it's supposed to like absorb the sweat, but maybe it's not all wool. The sole isn't or something.
Yeah, your sock thing is interesting because we both got like Doc Marten clogs last year. Or I got a pair and they were too big, so I gave them to you, and then I got another pair.
Oh, I forgot we have those. I never wear
I know,
those.
I just remembered we have them too. I love when the seasons change and you remember your clothes. I go, oh fuck, I forgot. I had these clogs. I will wear them every day for the next 4 months. But I can't, they're cuter without socks, but I cannot.
Yeah, you gotta get those low rise socks. You've got a lot of those, but
then you can see them in the open. I just can't, my feet get funky very fast. I just assumed that your feet did not get funky.
No, I notoriously because I used to always wear Vans and the same thing. I didn't like having the socks in there. And then socks became cool again, like wearing high socks with Vans. But I would go through Vans so quick because I would smell them out. I wouldn't even wear them down, but they would just be like corrupted because of my foot sweat.
Is that just really common with Roman feet? Is that what you have? You have Roman feet?
Is it Roman or did we say it was like Norwegian?
Norwegian. There's a foot graph going around. I don't even want to bring mine into it. Around social media. And I have Greek feet.
Because she's basically got an extra limb in one of those toes. It's longer than fucking the China Wall. It's insane. But it's cool because whatever, it's Greek. Greeks are cool. They're smart. They're
You're just trying to say something nice about my feet.
I didn't notice it until you pointed it out and we were graphing our feet. And I was like, damn. You've got an extra appendage up in there.
I didn't.
Yeah, mine are like a little more even. They're pretty aesthetically pleasing.
Are mine not? Mine are not?
Yeah. You like pointy. No, I love your feet. I'm just ripping on you.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that
you have
there's
said
a graph that you can
that
figure out your lineage via your toe lengths.
Well, I'm sure it's bullshit.
Yeah, of course,
but I would rather determine my lineage from a toe chart than sell my DNA to 23andMe.
It's true.
Did you hear that you're going to get cloned?
Yeah,
some corporation bought your DNA, buddy.
Yeah,
so.
I'm pretty excited about it to see my progeny out there amongst the crowd.
Yeah. What do you think his name will be?
Carcator.
What? Okay.
It's the first thing that came to my mind.
All right, we've got the first cat of the show.
So what do you want to get in today, Macy? What do you want to get into?
Well, Macy would like to revisit the conversation about technology because sometimes I say some out of left field shit and then the ADHD takes over or the conversation goes a different direction. And then afterwards, when I'm editing the podcast, I'm like, well, there's a pile of nuance I meant to add to that.
Yeah.
But when engaging with this podcast, and I put this in the description of the podcast, but like when engaging with this podcast, this is literally just how we talk all day. And our belief system and perspective is ever changing and evolving. And sometimes we have conversations with really kind of extreme perspectives that we are actually pretty nuanced people and we usually land on nuance, but it's not necessarily what's going to happen on every single episode. So just don't take these checks to the bank.
Yeah.
Take it all with a grain of salt. And for the love of God, do not write over the disc of your own personal truth for some crazy shit I said. I do love the idea of like just saying the most extreme version of something I think and then leaving it to kind of challenge maybe a rigid belief on the other side. But the conversation around tech, and I think you and I are going to do a whole podcast, we should, on like having open ajnas and right variables in human design, because we are both people that yours is more so than mine, but we're both people that we have open centers in our head and ajna. And so when we take in information, we become the information, we become that perspective for a while. And then I have 2 right variables and you have 4. You're all right. Not alt-right, all right.
I'm always right. That's what it means.
That's what you think it means.
I'm just kidding.
That's what you think it means.
That's what it feels like in the moment, but I definitely get proven wrong many a times. But I think that's what's interesting though about like a lot of any spiritual podcast, it's always, I think the core of it should be this exploration of ideas. And I think we're both really open. So it really, to a detriment sometimes where we will get, if in the moment we're like on a rabbit hole that's feeling so expanding, it's like everything in the world goes through that rabbit hole. And that I think sometimes could come across like, oh, we're not thinking about, many other negatives to it or whatever. But I think that's what's good about these kind of things is you just explore that idea for a while. And what could that mean with this idea, like kind of opening up your perspective. But it's like exploration of it. So I think that there's, next month we might be talking about something that contradicts all of this.
Yeah.
And I think that's the exciting part about it. And that's how I run my life. Like when I'm diving into new knowledge, it is just I do go down in it deep and like put it on and wear it for a while. But, once time goes by, I'm only wearing the sock of that original thing and I'm not wearing the whole suit.
Now you wear socks just to keep your feet of knowledge from getting funky.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is something where we are deconditioning from scientific materialism, where everything has to be like capital T truth. And you have to know exactly what you're talking about. And the stakes feel very high. And that's kind of one of many things that made it to where I didn't want to have a public platform. And I didn't want to talk into microphones for a few years.
Yeah.
Because there are things that I know to be true, and I like to share those things in a way that is compelling. And as a artist whose art is speaking, it's not necessarily compelling to speak the way that I actually think, which is that this is just my perspective and it's not capital T truth. So I do naturally kind of speak with an air of authority. But if you know me and you're actually in a back and forth conversation with me and you push against the thing that I am, putting forward as truth, I am so open, unless I've already spent a lot of time with your perspective, that I do go, okay, well, those two things can exist at the same time, or actually you have a really good point, or I have to think about that or whatever. And I just had to do so much healing to get to the point to where I realized that it's okay to just have conversations like these that are just conversations. And it's so necessary. It's so important for us as we are growing and expanding to not put that pressure on ourselves to know what's up. The needing to know with absolute certainty is scientific material. Cat number 2 is scientific materialism. It is the old thing. It's extremely masculine, mental, and it's also bullshit. It's also not true. You only know something until more information becomes available and you expand or you rot.
Yeah.
Because you're not expanding and you're not keeping your mind open. And there is a shame in the old world around changing your mind. Right? Or like, we've talked about this with you with like veganism or lots of other things that you've taken on before where it was very true for you at the time and then you got more information and then an expanded thing became true for you because you learned how to hold paradox. So it was like morally I feel this, but then I realized it came from saviorism or a fear of death, not to put words in your mouth, but so now it's ethical meat eating because my body was also suffering, like whatever. And then there are people who didn't like that you were a vegan and they were like, yeah, aha, Yeah.
And then when I go back to eating meat, they're like, I was right the whole time. You were wrong. And it's like, that's not how I feel about it. I was right in the thinking that I had at that time, and I wanted to take action to be congruent with my new thought. And then, yeah, as I kept pursuing, it was like, oh, I see nuance in this now. I'm glad that I had the experience of committing to it for those reasons. And then now I can adjust my life to be congruent with my new thinking. It's not like I'm going backwards or that I couldn't handle the temptation and I just had to eat meat again. It's like way more nuanced and complex than that. But yeah, and it's hard not to try to like go say to everybody that knew I was vegan and still think that I'm like, well, this is why, and try to explain myself to make it feel like I'm not just that I was wrong or something. But yeah, at the end of the day, you can't control that. And I think it's important to be able to hold paradox and like grow and then change and reorient your beliefs or whatever it is, you know. But I think the culture doesn't really encourage doing that. And I think it's interesting around this like whole topic of objective truth. Like, does it exist?
Right.
Because I don't think it really does, beyond if you want to say like there are a couple like universal rules that seem to be pretty true, but they're very basic and they're very nuanced. And it's just like centered around the idea of free will. But other than that, like I think the sickness that has happened from culture with the scientific materialism, like it's only you have to have the facts to back whatever you're doing, and if there are no facts there, then you're lost, and you don't know the objective truth. When yeah, it's that's a long like conversation that could be had, but I think that is the core of this issue of like if we are jumping from concept to concept and sometimes they contradict each other. There's nothing wrong with that, because overall there's a growth of expansion and like learning all the different nuances that revolve around the truth,
right,
in general.
Yeah, I think that capital T truth is the concept of that is a way to control people.
100%. That's like the whole thing about it. I think that's so fascinating, is that's what's got everybody controlled and trying to get everybody to conform to this, weird objective truth that doesn't exist when it's more subjective.
Yeah, it was really interesting to watch like your generation reject religion, which was also a system of control, a belief system that made it easy to control people, but it is also based in capital T truth.
Yeah.
And then watch your generation reject that, but then try to find solace or try to find safety and security, because that's what religion provides, safety and security. That's what capital T truth provides, is like, here is something you can hang your hat on. It'll always be the same, which is not how reality works. Nothing stays the same. And here's a daddy telling you what to do is what religion offers. It's certainty. And then the younger people, like, they reject that because of all of the yucky parts that came with it, the bigotry and the misogyny or whatever. And for a lot of people, because they go straight from that religious thing into atheism, which is like a pipeline, right? And then sometimes into spirituality or consciousness. But then scientific materialism swoops in, which is largely owned by corporations because it's not accessible to the individual and you're not allowed to dissent from it. And It's a top-down thing. It's just religion. It's just, it's scientism or whatever they call it. It's the exact same framework. It's the exact same multi-level marketing pyramid scheme. And so then scientific materialism comes in and says, well, I know you're feeling like you're free falling now because as you leave religion, you are responsible for your own belief system and to create your own framework and to develop your own moral compass and to know which way to go and what your life purpose is and whatever. And so then people cling to science to provide them with the same thing, but it's once again an exploitable system because you, the individual, are not able to determine what any of those things are for yourself. Something outside of you is giving it to you. So the capital T truth thing, to me, I think is definitely a construct of the last 400 years that is dissolving. And as that has, I've never even really resonated with it, but I've had so much conditioning to not want to be rejected by people who resonate with it. And I feel like that's what I've been healing.
Yeah.
So to land this plane, we tried a few times over the last 4 years to start a podcast like this, but I just did not have I still felt so much pressure to know that every single thing I said I could stand by years later. And the reality is the framework of the things I've talked about in Soberish and AOD and stuff is still there. But I listened to some old AOD yesterday just to see if I'm working on a new one and just to see if I was rehashing. And I was like, oh, I disagree with like 3 things I said there.
Yeah.
You know? So I can't both be authentically growing as a person, authentically speaking my perspective in the moment, and then have it all like be true for me in a few years, because that's just not how I operate as a person. And this sensation that I have some huge responsibility to everyone who listens to me to make sure that I have everything right I don't resonate with that. It's my responsibility as a listener to check in with myself and to not force someone else's belief system, not to pedestalize someone else, not to force someone else's belief system, to take everything with a grain of salt and to know that everyone has an individual, unique perspective when we're at our best.
Yeah.
You know, and so I've done so much deconditioning of collectivist, consensus, reality, homogenized pressures in the last few years that it's really crazy that I can even get on the podcast now and talk without 500 filters going, well, this group of people might think this and this group of people, like it was a brain disease I had for a few years. So anyway, all that to say, I'm going to over-explain myself. No, I'm just kidding. But I do have thoughts. Like I have genuine thoughts about technology. And I guess what I was trying to speak to was culture is changing and the way that human is changing. And we are still very conditioned by the constructs. I guess we have to do a whole episode on the cross of planning versus the cross of sleeping phoenix. But this is another human design thing that I don't think I've explained on here. But we're coming out of a 400-year cycle in which the constructs were about work, continuity, focus, the family. It was about sacrifice the individual to build infrastructure. I think I've said that.
Constructs, you mean like the background frequency, right? The thing that is kind of the blueprint for everyone. There's like a
premise of a game, and then there's games and games and games. And so we are ending a 25,000-year cycle in which like this is the culmination of all of humanity. But for this 25,000-year cycle. That's why everything feels so crazy and like it's ending. But in that 25,000-year cycle, there's like multiple 12,000 to, I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
You know.
Oh, there's a 75,000-year cycle. I don't know. It doesn't matter. That's not human design. That's something else. Within human design, there are these 400-year cycles that line up with what the aliens said about video games. And the aliens said, but they speak in fucking code, like this book you're reading. That's how they talk. They talk in like metaphor, and then I have to go on like a scavenger hunt over the course of decades to figure out what the fuck they were saying. So he said we were going from one video game to another video game. They said that video game is masculine, this video game is feminine. For years, I thought that meant boys and girls. I didn't know. And now I understand that masculine is the mind, feminine is feelings. Masculine would be like left brain, feminine is right brain. Masculine's about structure and putting things in boxes. Feminine is about creativity and, you know, chaos, the void, whatever. So that's absolutely happening. And then in human design, we're going from all left arrows to all right arrows. Anyway, so they perfectly match, but human design gives this masculine structure to these relatively feminine clues that I was given. And so I've been really into it. So we're going from something called the cross of planning into the cross of sleeping phoenix. And the entirety, but then we're also outside of human design going to more points of awareness. And so the way that we experience reality is going to be internal and not external. And so the thing when I'm talking about tech that I'm pushing back on is that if you think the way that humanity has humaned for your lifetime in the last few lifetimes, and all you're drawing from is the past, then the way that we get to where we're going is going to seem like there is something fundamentally wrong. And we are in a transition, and I guess we will always be in a state of transition, but we are in a sharp pivot to a completely different way of being. And the cross of planning, which was the infrastructure, and the externalized consensus reality is collapsing. And so you have this whole generation, I would say like Gen Z, maybe a little bit into Gen A, but probably Gen Z, that are the last to be really born into the old world. But the old world has nothing to offer them, right? There's nothing left. There's no gas in that tank. But they were raised to be in it. And so they are this product of this threshold in which there's not much there for them. And so you can't put them into the pipelines that we were put into. You can't do the like college, go find a job, go find a career, and then, you know, whatever. At least with Gen A, I feel like we understand, at least I understand, none of this shit's going to be the same. Like technology is going to fundamentally change the world. And also we're going to go through a lot of shifts and changes in the next 10 years. So I don't put much effort into conditioning my 11 and 14-year-old into anything to do with the future. But Gen Z was the last generation to be put into that pipeline.
You mean the past? Anything to do with the past?
Yeah, the past. What did I say?
The future.
Future. So anyway, my pushback on the technology is bad. Is most of what I hear people saying is like, they don't want to get jobs. They're not dating the way we used to date. They don't care about having a driver's license. They're not externally focused, right? And I think that they are here for the future, but conditioned into the past. And their gifts and traits and the way that they show up in the world doesn't have a place in whatever you want to call this, the capitalism, right? And so they are somewhat adrift and will be somewhat adrift until the new background frequency kind of takes over and our priorities shift, because that's how these video games work. Like the background frequency like possesses people and suddenly your priorities change and you care about things different and you look at things differently. And so deconditioning is really all we can do. And I think that the internet, specifically the internet, is a great tool for deconditioning. However, I do have concerns about looking at something this close to your face on developing eyes, the effect that it has on the fast-paced stuff has on attention span, although I don't think our attention span needs to exist the way it used to. We're still oriented around being factory workers. And that's what that's my rub, I guess, is that we are still deeply conditioned that everything that is good are actually things that make you a good employee. And that's because from the time you were a small child, you were put into an indoctrination camp for 12 years. And all of what society was telling you is good is like consistency, sticking to things, continuity, like all these things simply made you a good employee. That's not what the human experience is about. Having a long attention span or sticking to things or seeing things through aren't necessarily great qualities for a creative being. They are great qualities for a factory worker. And you were, maybe unconsciously, it's just because the background frequency was that, but like probably quite literally purposefully conditioned into a machine to make you a good employee. And so much of what we look at these kids and we go, you know, we don't know what's going on inside of them, you know. But anyway, There's a couple of people commented, and that their kids are not having a great experience with it. So I just kind of want to walk back the kid thing. I was kidding in the caption where I said, give your baby a cell phone. I definitely do not think babies, toddlers should have tech for a million reasons. But I think I'm going to resist the digital world or the internet in favor of an analog world when I think where we're going is a combination of the two. And I think villainizing the internet when the internet is just a reflection of the ills of our culture.
Yeah, that's what I find interesting about it, that we were talking about earlier, where it's probably most of the issues beyond the the effects of the screen and some of this physical effects from the tech that can be detrimental to a young brain. But the biggest issue that I think is not talked about enough is that it is the sickness of the culture, or not even the sickness, but this radical transformation that is occurring from the old one to the new one. And the new one is we don't have any structure for it yet. There's no actual societal structures that are encouraging that. And so the reflection of the culture, the ill parts of it that are directly accessible through the phone and the internet is what's causing the issues in the kids, whether they're feeling they have ADHD or they now feel like they don't belong anywhere because they're viewing some of culture going through this transformation that is complicated. It's but I think that's where the crux of it is. It is weird to just, even for adults, to have complete access to everything that's happening in the world, where you can watch really negative videos that are occurring on the other side of the world. And especially if the algorithm starts to feed them to you, you can see a lot of that, more so than you ever would in reality, where it potentially was always going on, but we just didn't have the access to watch 5 of them in a row online. You only had access to see what was on the news. And so just in general, it's a lot to be this connected and see the good and bad parts of all of that on a regular basis. It's a lot to take in and not be somewhat affected by it. If I watch 7 or 8 videos on TikTok or Twitter that are all these fights, that are occurring everywhere because of the disagreements everybody's in, and this the culture expressing its rage and frustration. I can, by the end of the day, be in that energy and be negatively looking at things because I watched that. And so that is a real effect that's happening, but it does seem like it's actually kind of a side effect of us going through this transformation that's necessary to get to this other place. We have to kind of expel all of that. And part of that is observing it and being a witness to it, that see wow, this is the chaos that we're all in right now. And the internet's a powerful tool because it really can show you any of that. And so that's where I think there is some, for young kids, it's good to have some boundaries with them and guide them through that, not let them maybe see a lot of those things that they can't handle. Which is helpful, but in general, the tech is not the bad guy. It's not the thing that's something we need to restrict from them full stop, because I think that would be not setting them up for a potential future where they need to be able to know how to use it and see it as this helpful device. So it's the culture that is the kind of culprit there, I think, not the actual tech.
Yeah, it feels like we're in some sort of ascension speed round, and this might just be an unsolvable problem, because I definitely went through a phase last summer where we took a vacation that was no tech.
Yeah, we tried to do the
we tried to do that, and I remember when the kids were pushing back a little bit, I cried and was I just don't know if this is because I get all kinds of shit in my head, so I was is this causing anxiety, whatever? And the reality is, my youngest developed anxiety when she started public school. She's not she's had unfettered access to tech since she was, I don't know, 4 or something, and will drop it in a second if there's something in the physical reality to do, like literally anything. If you're willing to go do whatever, she doesn't give a shit about the phone. But then when she started going to public school, we started having like massive anxiety issue things here. And they're both doing nervous system work now, which has helped a lot. You know, they're both going through puberty. But there was a point where, I don't know, we were on some kick about technology. And I was worried that for me, it's more about the physical, like, what is that light doing to your brain type stuff? Or what is the, I did end up putting like a restriction on how much TikTok or like fast, short things, you know, I was experimenting with that. So I think those things are all like valid. As far as like what kids are taking in from culture, we're in some sort of speed round of working through cultural things that I have watched the 14-year-old take on ideas that I didn't love, you know, for a period of time, that were heavily influenced by like victim consciousness. But that's the 55th gene key. I mean, that's the 55th gate. If you don't know what this is, go to Google 55th gene key audio, and there's a free audio. And then every time you are trapped in your own victim pants, play that audio, because that's what I do. So there is a mutation happening, according to human design and gene keys. There's a mutation happening, and you could just call it the awakening, but it's where we shift to a completely different species. And in the 55th gene key, they talk about a mutation. Apparently the dragonfly is like straight up a different creature until one day it turns into a dragonfly. And that's basically what humans are doing right now. And I resonate with that a lot. I think that we have been living in this limited belief in, you know, like a fear-based unconscious state for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And we are waking up and turning into what I used to call gods. I guess I don't really say that as much anymore, but as we pass through the shadow frequency of that, everyone's going to go into their maximum victim consciousness. And these young kids, these teens, really seem to be, many of them, spending a few years in this like chronically outraged, chronically victimized state, which I think is scary for people that come from, like, let's say the X generation, where we were like objectively abused, many of us, by our parents. We were still getting hit by our parents. Most of us, I don't know any female-bodied people from my generation that didn't get molested. I mean, that was like so fucking rare, that we were raised desensitized to violence and all these other things. And we have kind of a little bit of a maybe dissociated survivor personality, but we're also on a healing journey. And so I think it freaks a lot of people from this generation and like elder millennials who have kids of this age to see them kind of go into this helpless victim state. But to me, it's transient. And I've already watched my oldest child go from that to like making a decision that they didn't want to live, like they didn't want to be fragile and, you know, so affected by their things outside of themselves. They didn't want to need to be validated by people outside of themselves. Like they did that on their own, you know. I was there to guide, but I pretty much let my kids take their own path. And as a teenager who spent lots of time in a mental institution, who spent lots of time thinking that my parents were the devil and, you know, like whatever, and who took the hard way, I just have a lot of tolerance, I guess, for teenagers to take that kind of path. It feels like a rite of passage to me.
Yeah.
That path led to me waking up, you know, in many ways. But I spent years, and I have the 55th gene key and gate, whatever, like natally. It's like my primary thing. And so my relationship with victim consciousness, you know, I know it well. I visit it every now and then nostalgically.
You got a whole closet of victim pants?
Yeah, I have lots of victim pants. Comfortable victim pants that take days to get out of. So I think that there's so much to it. I guess it could be its own 10-episode series. When we're talking about technology, are we talking about the actual physical device? Are we talking about the internet? And if we're talking about the internet, what are we talking about? Are we talking about having access to other people's point of view? Or like my main concerns are like not free access to other people's point of view, because I think that's what brings us back into unity consciousness, is to be introduced to lots of other perspectives. But you have to spend years learning how to interact with other people's perspectives and learn paradox. And it's going to be messy in the interim. I'm much more concerned with a corporatized, government-run, curated information that just like propagandizes the internet. Yeah. Is to me something that's much more like whatever. But so for me, my job as a parent is to, and I've tried to restrict it. Tried to restrict it last year, tried to put a limit on how much certain apps were allowed to be on. And it does this thing when you're a parent that if you're feeling the energy, you realize that when you as a parent make a big deal about restricting something, you turn it into this shiny diamond of a thing. And you create a rift between you and the child. And this was even with adults. You create a rift. We've had this with you and like weed. It's like you spend too much time villainizing something they care about, and you will slow down the natural process. Same thing with when they get their first shitty boyfriend or girlfriend, If you put yourself as a parent in opposition of that, you slow down their process of figuring out on their own limitations. And so for me, it's junk food with the kids. It's sugar with the kids. I controlled their diets when they were young, and they were fed, organic food with very little sugar. As they got older, they started to want more of that stuff. And the more I dug in, the more times I said poison, the more appealing it was. And now I'm just like, yeah, whatever. I'm not buying it, but whatever you can get your hands on, get your little grubby hands on some food dye and some high fructose corn syrup. Let's talk about how your body feels after you eat it. But it can't come from this, like, I told you so, whatever point. And so we did do one trip without tech. And afterwards, we talked about and that was all of us. How did you feel? Was it easier to pay attention? Whatever. And there was just still that kind of slight, with the older child, slight resentment at being told what to do, that they didn't get to get curious. And so we went back to like, okay, you guys make your own decisions. Let's talk about it. And when we just started talking about feelings from a place of neutrality, like, how does it feel when you're on it all day? How does it feel when you're absorbing this kind of thing? Like, how does it feel when you took on that perspective for a while? And when it's, I don't have an agenda, and I'm not coming from a place of afraid that they're rotting their brains or whatever. They do get curious and they do get aware. And that's how you actually heal addictions to anything, is to accept the part of you that's exploring that, let it run its course, stay curious, So that's my 2 cents on it. I'm more or less talking about grown-ups. I do have mixed feelings about some of it with kids, but I just trust that we are waking up and that there really isn't anything for them here. There really isn't. We keep nostalgically trying to revisit things that were so full of energy when we were kids, and they're not full of energy for those kids. And they're like, okay, what is it? Okay, this is kind of dumb, And I really, truly believe that's not because the tech is bad and rotted their brains. I really, truly believe that we're like hermit crabs leaving a shell that we have outgrown, and we haven't quite scooted our little shell butts into a shell,
Yeah, I think it's
Did that one not quite?
No, that works. Shell butts or crab butts. Yeah, I always had this, like, I think there's a limit to this. It's like when I'm thinking, when kids are really young, like there's a good point to limit what they're seeing in the world that is, complicated and more negative. It's more for like an adult brain to understand. But I remember having this conversation right before I had my kid with a tech in the band or something, and we were talking about like the internet and how crazy it is and how so many kids just have phones at a young age and they have direct access to all of the intensity of the internet. And he was advocating for, like, I'm not going to let my kid have a phone until they're 18. Like, I just can't do it. There's nothing good from this. Like, they'll just go and watch death and porn and all this stuff at a young age. And I was like, yeah, of course, I don't want my kid seeing gnarly shit when they're young. But I was like, I think I was slowly feeling into this idea that, like, what doing that to an extreme state, like, we are protecting them, and not protecting them, but we're like cutting off a certain part of reality as if it doesn't exist for them, and denying it in a way. And a lot of that is like the darker parts of reality. And I think that's a huge issue with some parts of the culture, that like they are just in denial about things that are negative and bad, and try to like outweigh that with positive thinking or just focusing on the good things. And I think that doing that too much to a young kid, and I think it's better at like an adolescence age, doesn't set them up for the world that once they are 18 and they get that phone and then they have access to all this stuff just immediately, like, that is a bigger issue for them to try to figure out, like, what is this? I didn't know that all of this existed. That is, so dark, I guess. But instead of in trying to do it in a way that you actually like bridle that out and you don't like cut it off for them. So obviously certain ages, you don't want them seeing dark shit. They're still, very like a sponge, and you want to make sure that there's like some healthy thoughts and perspectives that like anchor in.
And I think I think there are people who raise their kids, a big movement towards like homesteading and natural, connected to the earth, no tech, whatever. And I think that's fine. I guess I'm maybe speaking more to the shaming and guilting of parents who haven't done that. There is this kind of like, there is this idea that, parents who are 24/7 helicoptering their kids, fully engaged with their kids, playing with their kids every minute of the day, and like have them out with the chickens, catching the eggs and gardening and shit, is a superior parenting style than letting your kids play video games or whatever. And I guess that's kind of the part that I would push back on. My kids obviously didn't have access to that sort of, like, as children, I was like, you can have like coding games, and that was it. It was like a tablet and you could code and you could learn how to engage with technology, but it was still a pretty controlled environment until Phoenix wanted to check out, I think we did like YouTube Kids on an airplane or something. And then there was this weird era where people were like slipping violence into cartoons on YouTube Kids, and it freaked me out. And then the biggest thing for me at the time was like Phoenix is extremely smart. And I was afraid of dulling that with mindless entertainment. And so I only wanted Phoenix to use technology to learn how to code or learn Spanish or whatever. I didn't want Phoenix to just be watching dumbass unboxing videos. The unboxing videos creeped me out a lot. And so, but Phoenix was very drawn to that stuff. And so I think I told the story on the last one, but Phoenix started as a 5-year-old downloading from the cloud YouTube while I wasn't, it wasn't the cloud. We didn't have Apple back then, but like downloading YouTube, using it till I got home, like getting rid of it, which is the kind of shit I did when being told no as a kid. And so
it's smart. It's
very smart until I walked in the room and Savina said, I'm not on YouTube, you know, and not that kind of smart. And so as a kid, for me, as someone who has like intense demand avoidance, telling me I can't do something only made me not trust you. It didn't stop me from doing it. And I think that's kind of what I was trying to say, is that a lot of the way, and now I'm talking about teenagers, a lot of the way that people deal with technology is similar to the abstinence model of dealing with teenagers having sex. The reality is once kids are old enough to start to have sexual feelings, it's weird as a parent to address that, but to put your head in the sand and just be like, no, you shouldn't do that, is how you end up a grandmother in your 30s. It doesn't stop them from having sex.
Right.
And what I've noticed is people who really resist the technology aspect of being a young person today, unless you've got your kids in the mountains somewhere where they're not connected to other kids. But the reality is like, you know, I've got a 5th grader. They all have cell phones, you know. My kids got cell phones earlier than they had like old cell phones for a long time, but like the pandemic sped that up a little bit. But the pandemic and their ability to connect to other kids through Roblox and stuff like is what saved my kids from being depressed like everyone else's kids. Their ability to socialize on the internet was like what kept my kids from like fucking losing it during the pandemic. So I just don't think it's all bad. And I think it's here for a reason. I think the internet is here. I don't know how permanent it is. You know, it's already shifting and changing, but I think that social media exists so that we could get together as a collective and work out all of our separation consciousness.
Yeah, and that's what I think it is too. And that's somewhat of a messy process.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, I think that's what we're all afraid of subjecting our kids to, is the mess of that. But what good are we doing if we don't like help educate them about that and let them partake in some of it to get us to this other side? And I often think that the kids, the younger generation, is always the ones that are kind of, they end up being able to hack certain parts of the reality because they're coming in with like we're all like behind the adults because we've gotten into our rigid way of thinking and everything and accepting seeing the good and bads of all the tech. But there's always this like new tech that comes out that the kids get a hold of and the adults villainize, and some kind of resistance to change. It's like what the TV was when I was younger, and like video games and all these things that like the parents try to resist in the kids, but then 10 years later, the kids end up utilizing that technology to create something, you know, very liberating or something really positive and something new. And I think I don't know if we really understand what the internet connectedness is actually doing in the long run. And I do think the young kids are going to like radically innovate and change something with that. So if we're cutting that off from them and limiting it based on our nostalgic thinking of our childhood or trying to go backwards to like a better time, is like in a sense resisting the change and blocking them from potentially understanding this thing at a young age. And again, helping them healthily understand it in whatever way we can, but knowing that there's something like really great for it. It is here for a reason. And that there's a possibility that tech is something that like can drastically change culture, and they might be the kids that do it, you know?
Yeah.
I just think too, there are a lot of positives. I mean, in general, video games, you know, were villainized a lot when I was younger, and my parents let me do it a good amount. I think I did have a limit on like how much time, but I learned so much hand-eye coordination from just being on the screen and using, you know, trying to control a joystick and immersing myself into that world. Like when I then became a drummer and did all these other things, there was like already hand-eye coordination like running, and I could really quickly adapt to certain things.
problem solving skills also, like strategizing.
Skills. Yeah, the imagination stuff. There's so much in video games that are helpful. They're not just all bad and a waste of time. They can be addictive and they can be like escapism, but everything can be that way, really. You know, as an adult, we're like escaping and addicted to everything.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot. There's the dopamine stuff. There's the ADHD. I just think that we're in a transition, and I see everything that's happening as a transition and as a necessary moment of time while we work out the shift from this very externalized, consistent, predictable, false security based reality in which no one's happy. But I can't fucking imagine being a young person right now. I can't imagine being like 15 to 30 right now, because what? Like literally, what do we want? We want to send them to school for 12 years and then they can go to college, and then they get out of college and they pick a career, and then they meet someone, and then they get married, and then they have a gender reveal for the baby, and then they have the baby, and then they just have another baby, and then another baby, and then he gets promoted, and then they get divorced, and then they find, it's like we're on this treadmill of the exact same fucking life being over and over and over again. And before the thing started to collapse, I can tell you that the American dream or whatever was feeling empty for a lot of fucking people. Like a lot of people in my generation were like, why are we sleepwalking through this exact same life that our parents lived, you know? So then when people started to look at it and started to go, maybe I don't want to do this exact same thing. I mean, there was like, you get married by 25, you have kids by, it's like everyone was doing the same shit. It was like a copy and paste over and over and over again. And now that it's falling apart, you get young people who don't really know what it was like going, well, I don't even get to do that. And it's like, well, you would have fucking hated it. Just trust me. You would have hated it. It was great for the boomers, it was great for the generations before that. But once we, as a human consciousness, experience the fullness of something, we want to move on to something else. And so we are just simply moving on to something else. But in this interim, in this 10 to 20 year interim, I'm really rooting for 10. What are Gen Z supposed to do? Literally, like, what are they supposed to do? They're so young that they don't have a frame of reference of like change. And they have half of the world telling them, well, if you just ate less, avocado toast and stopped going to Starbucks or whatever, I don't know, anyone goes to Starbucks anymore, but like if you just had some discipline and got a job, but then they're not built for it. So then they go and try to work in the thing. And because they're not built for it, it's falling apart because the internal experience is not syncing up with it. Capitalism, whatever you want to call it, is falling apart for whatever story you want to attach to that. My belief is what's happening is it's the background frequency is changing, and the background frequency is changing to something that is like about personal expression and an internal experience and about intimacy instead of commitment. And so now these young people, they're like, why can't I find a committed relationship? Because you're not here for a committed relationship. You're here for intimacy. And you're going to spend your life figuring out intimacy instead of committing yourself to something you don't even want to do anymore. It's just a completely different game. How are we supposed to guide them when we are indoctrinated into a game that's dead? And so they are this like, I think they're really cool. I think young people are cool. And I think it's just an old ass fucking old head take to be like, it was good when I was young and it's what you do is stupid. So when I was young, locked that in my brain.
I remember that too. When I was young, I thought like my parents saying that, it's like, I'm never going to be like that.
Yeah.
And then you do at a certain point, it's like 30, mid 30s, you get like locked into this groove. And then you open your eyes and you're like, everybody's not doing the thing that I was doing when I was young. And I'm so nostalgic about it. Like, and you start doing the same thing. It's like these kids don't know what it's all about, man. I used to drink water out of a hose, and I was all those things and you're resisting. They're in a new paradigm. It's like completely new environment. So it's going from cross of planning to the cross of sleeping phoenix.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be, the human design gives a window, right? Where it's like 2027 or
yeah. So we've been in the cross of planning started in 1614. And I've had AI do a lot of cross-referencing cross of planning to what we call colonization. And it's
that's when it started.
Yeah. I mean, there's also like thresholds in between.
Right.
And the log line is something I created after like deep diving this for a while. But I would say the cross of planning, the log line for that is sacrifice the individual to build infrastructure. And the log line, I would say, for the cross of sleeping phoenix is individuals innovating. And one of the biggest shifts besides masculine to feminine is we're going from a consensus reality to a very individual reality. And this is something that I was talking about. We're all playing one video game and now we're going into playing our own video games. And I think this is triggering for a lot of people, specifically people who are heavily, like, personally wired for consensus. So you can deep dive into your human design. I haven't quite gotten that good at it yet, but to see if you have individual circuitry, collective circuitry, which means the big us, like all of us, or tribal circuitry, which means your smaller groups. I'm mostly interacting with this, engaging with this from the perspective where it lines up with this thing I've been trying to articulate for a long time. When I'm talking about community, I'm talking about decentralized community. I am talking about something that is built on the foundation of autonomy. And it's not like the group decides what we do and then the rules get imposed on you, right? So yesterday I got a speeding ticket for driving through a school zone. School's already in, so there's no children around. And it was the second day of school. And so there's been nobody on that road for a while. And it's a 50-mile-an-hour road. And then it becomes 35 miles an hour for a small stretch. And I guess I was going 54. And that is because I am operating intuitively, which is like, there's no fucking children anywhere around. So I'm not even thinking about it. Plus, it just was the summer. So there, obviously, as we get further in the school year, my body operates different when there are kids around. I am, extremely cautious in the car and very cautious when there's kids around in the car. But I'm just like operating intuitively. And in this moment, I didn't need to do that. Same thing with like, if there's fucking no one behind me, I don't need to use the turn signal.
Right.
But all of our laws and our society is set up for consensus. It's set up that homogenized rules that cater to the absolute dumb fuck of us, dumbest fuck of all of us, right? It's like not based on intuition. So I got a gnarly ticket. These systems of authority are based on like rigid rules and telling people what to do. And so much of it is counterintuitive. It's not synced up with how nature works because the individual has been stifled. Because in order to build the kind of infrastructure, the worldwide global infrastructure that we have built in the last 400 years, you had to oppress large groups of people. You had to create hierarchies that are not the hierarchies that exist in nature. They are imposed hierarchies. You had to make most people do things they didn't want to do. You had to sacrifice the individual. And so we got to see very few individuals actually innovating. And what we see as the result of the entropy, I think is the word, where it evolves to the point where it self-destructs, of the cross of planning, is now we are in a corporate oligarchy. And none of the rules make sense and everything's falling apart and everything is so homogenized and everything looks exactly the same. And it's like just replicating like cancer, right? So the cross of the sleeping phoenix will now devour the cross of planning and everyone's moral compass will shift. And this is why you see, so much culture war stuff happening, is because the new culture of the new background frequency is coming in and it's looking at everything we did in the cross of planning and going, this is horrible. Why, what the hell was this? But people were possessed by that energy. And that's just the video game. That's just the Matrix. The programming of the Matrix changes and you will experience something now different than what you experienced before. There's so much to this, but the biggest thing, I think, the biggest shift that has stood out to me and that I'm really passionate in helping people with is that we have lived in a consensus reality that was mostly tribal and collective energies. And that's why there was a global infrastructure was able to be created, because whatever the background frequency is, we will think is the premise of reality. It's programming you, it's conditioning you. And so you will hear people say like, well, humans are social creatures or humans are whatever, but that's all just depends on that.
Right.
You actually don't know. When you look back at history, you're projecting the way you currently are on beings 2,000 years ago without really even paying attention to how much human consciousness has expanded in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
You're assuming everyone had all that information, right? So last 400 years, collectivist world, right? And there are really negative things that came with that. It's not good or bad, it just is. But you had people being forced out of their spiritual beliefs, forced out of their religion, there are gnarly aspects of collectivism. And we are now moving into individualism. And the thing that I think is really interesting is how much individualism is being vilified.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I had to spend a few years okay, well, I'm very pro individualism. I don't call what y'all are calling individualism. I call that competition. And to me, competition is a construct of collectivism.
Yeah.
And so my test so far, and this is a work in progress, but if from a very young age you've always questioned things, so when things were presented to you as this is just the way things are, and you maybe not even verbally said it, but if there was always a part of you that rejected that or was but why? You're probably wired to being an individual. If you hate being told what to do, you're probably wired to be an individual. If your deconstruction journey has been heavy on learning to stop people pleasing or masking, you're probably an individual. I can't say whether or not that lines up with the human design thing, but I have found that there are two different types of people, probably way more than that, but that there are people who are very wired to be individuals and people who are very wired to be a part of a thing. And then the individuals does not mean you're alone, but it means you don't receive your authority from outside. The fact that a lot of people believe something does not make it fact, right? So just think even 5-10 years ago where people were like, well, all your friends think this,
right?
You've had that experience where it's well, everyone else thinks this. And it's I don't give two fucks what everyone else thinks. So when we come out of this kind of consensus background frequency, you're going to get more and more people, and we're seeing it already, splitting off. And that's what I believe the split is. When we talk about the split, I don't believe it's a split from awake and asleep. I believe it's we were on I can't remember if I've already said this on this podcast, but we were on a iceberg. In 2020, the iceberg got broken and now everyone's just drifting in different directions. And the connections that you have to people will be very voluntary, and they will have to be because you're already naturally in resonance. It won't be based on you need to change because I say this.
Right.
And the communities that we build, I believe, will be small. I believe the federal government will fall. Have I already said all this? The federal government will fall. The the global thing will still be connected probably through some form of internet, but will not be connected through governments and corporations. Because the government will fall, then the corporations will fall. And they will fall simply because nobody will give a shit about an authority outside of them. And we won't have systems you didn't follow the rules. It will be, you need to know how to make a decision for yourself based on your intuition. Otherwise, you're going to go through what people who are very much needing to be told what to do will be experiencing this shift as some sort of Mad Max. I mean, they already are, right?
Yeah.
You see people every day who, like, I'm having the time of my life. But, like, if the system and the group, and there are a lot of people you could say, they're trying to put the genie back in the bottle. And they're like, we need more community. And it's like, what's your plan for community? Who gets to be the boss? For whom does power not corrupt? There has to be some sort of community in which I don't need to control everything that you do. And we've not gotten there yet. So the main construct are abundance, but abundance is the same one that's victim consciousness. So once you heal your shadow of victim consciousness and believe that your beliefs that life was happening to you and your addiction to being victimized will, that might have rubbed a couple people the wrong way. Having experienced something is not the same thing as the identity of victim, but that's the same for another day. You then move into abundance. And then we remember that scarcity was a construct fed to us and that it's not actually real. And that the way that our relationship with the earth actually works, because we are a part of the earth, is every single thing we need, food, medicine, whatever, materializes directly through the earth. The 59th is about intimacy, and this is where you learn how to be truly known by another person, which is very different than being chosen by them or, meeting someone in your 20s and staying together for the rest of your life. And so we will be playing with a lot of different kind of relationship dynamics. The younger you are, the less likely it is that you will experience an old kind of relationship, the commitment, the pipeline relationship. We will also lose interest in just manically replicating other human beings. And so you're already seeing that. We physically won't be able to. And also most people won't want to have kids. The 34th is about power. And this is where we will learn about our relationship with externalized power, government, corporations, celebrities. It's already happening. You realize your power is inside of yourself. No one can take it from you. But if they are holding it, you have to take it back. They can't give it back to you. You see this. This is so much of what people are working out on the internet. And then the 20th is about the present moment. And I believe the influence of the 20th is why we are losing our memories. Everyone's afraid they have dementia. Time is ceasing to feel so linear. And our obsession with getting somewhere versus just being, so we'll go from being a human doing to a human being. I can't express to you how starkly contrasted the cross of the sleeping phoenix is from the cross of planning. And so this window that we are in is just simply a massive shift from one video game to another. And the best possible thing you could be doing for yourself is to decondition the parts of you that are wired to survive in the cross of planning, learn about the cross of sleeping phoenix and lean into those energies, because in about 3 years, there will be no cross of planning energy left except for in boomers. And I think we'll see a massive drop off in the boomers, which is, they're in their 80s anyway, a lot of them. But anyway, it's becoming an extremely individual reality. And that is, I think, my primary passion to talk about, because I'm a very naturally individual person. For people who pass the individual test of what I just asked, you will go from living a life of dissonance to living in resonance. And all that means is you were a square peg in a round hole your whole life. And now you're going to be a round peg in a round hole. Square peg. You will go from swimming upstream to the wind being at your back. And for people who are wired more for collectivism, you will have the opposite. And that's fine. You chose it before you got here. They're both fine ways of being. And just like individuals had to find a way to be individuals in a reality that didn't celebrate that, collectivists will have to find a way to be, and collectivist is not a human design word. I'm just using that to describe we'll have to find a way to be true to their, create communities of other people who see the world that way and do things that way. But the grand energy will not support getting everyone on the same page. And so you see so many people exhausting themselves on the internet, kind of evangelizing their perspective and everyone fighting over perspectives. And I think that that's an important window of time. But I think we are not far from people realizing like, oh, we actually are all looking at this from a different direction. And I can't change other people's minds, nor can I pause my truth waiting for everyone else to validate it, you know? And then the idea of like a government over top of you or corporations, that will just fade. I think a lot of those things will go out with a whimper. I mean, I believe we're witnessing the idea of government going out with a whimper when people realize like no one should be in charge of anyone else. And, you know, this is crystal fucking clear as day to me, but I can sometimes when I say these things, people who are still like deeply conditioned by we need those things, you know, are just like cannot comprehend how we do it without that. And it's the background frequency is very powerful. And we're seeing it already. Like that thing where you became an introvert and now you can't really, not you, but like you can't really socialize the way you used to, or you don't have the stamina to work the way you used to or whatever. That's the background frequency shifting. That's the video game changing. And if you keep comparing this version of yourself to the version of yourself 10 years ago, which I even do, it's like crazy what I used to be able to do. And now I can't make my energy do that. You know, it just is. It's just happening whether you like it or not. But the more it comes in, the more the priorities will change. And I believe the effect it will have is that the vast majority of people will begin to take responsibility for themselves. And when people take responsibility for themselves, you don't need rules, because people who take responsibility for themselves also have a sense of how much space they're taking up. Do you know what I mean? When you think of people who take up a bunch of space and don't consider the effect they're having on other people, those are extremely entitled, disempowered people. People who are in their own power tend to not impose, right?
Yeah.
I thought about this when we were on vacation. Like the what's yours, mine, and ours is something that we talk a lot about in this house. And we are of the belief that if there's televisions, they are very personal. It's a very personal experience, right? And I've wanted to live that way for 20 years, but my ex-husband wasn't into that. But you get on a family vacation and it's like someone turns on the TV and it's like, okay, but now we're all watching TV. I don't want to watch. Like now we're all being imposed by this thing, you know? And it's just kind of a natural, the more autonomous I become, like I'm aware of the fact that like I'm in my own energy, I'm doing my own thing. This has an impact on other people. So when I'm driving down that road and there's kids around, my awareness goes, okay, this isn't just me. There are people's children out here right now. And so I naturally change my behavior to make sure that I am considering, and not in a people-pleasing way, just an awareness that I am a part of an ecosystem. That comes like the more I take personal responsibility. I don't need a fucking authority outside of me to tell me to do that. I actually resent that part of it because I'm not an idiot. But I believe that as these energies start to hit the planet and people finish their little victim wah-wah phase, they will start to move into their own power. Human consciousness will raise, and these systems will become obsolete because people simply don't need to be governed, you know? But it was when we stopped going to the system and begging it to fucking take care of us or tell us what to do or whatever. But you're already seeing that. I mean, you're masses of people moving away from the idea of government. You know, sorry, that was a 10-hour monologue.
No, it was great, though. I think that's, you just let it rip, baby. But it's good. I resonate with all of that, too. And I can see it and feel it clearly. I mean, I think I am all right in my human design. And I've always been that, like, feeling like I don't fit in. And the more I learn, the more I autonomize and individualize and kind of deprogram some of those things that were never me anyways, but I kind of took them on because it was the only way to feel like you could fit in. feels so good to see that there is like a reality we're moving into that is, for me, I'm much more excited about, because I love that individualized, creative kind of world that we could all live in. And it is hard to conceive from this life that we've known that there is like the only way to have the freedom that we have and the structure is because there are these groups of people that everyone's following rules and organizing, and that keeps the infrastructure up, you know? So like we can get water to our house and we get food delivered here and there. And, you know, we rely on all this infrastructure. And I think it's been hard for me and to see how we move to that new reality, that new game that is individual based, without like the infrastructure really like falling apart completely, to the point where we maybe have to go through a time where we're like all disconnected from that infrastructure and have to live off the land and no internet and things like that. But I've realized as I've like worked through that for a while now that it doesn't have to be. I mean, I still think we could experience something like that the infrastructure drops off so much that to build it back up in a new game, like there will be a moment of nothing, you know, and we do have to do that. But then I'm also like, I look at the internet sometimes, and I think this could be like, as I was mentioning before, like the internet is something bigger than it's going to be utilized in a way that we're not even aware of yet. And I just look at things online when you watch how parts of the internet have innovated, and a lot of it is the decentralized parts of it that could be the bridge from going from this cross of planning, really like rule-based infrastructure, and kind of everybody's obligated to go to work to hold up and get the water pumping to everybody's house, you know, that kind of thing. That there's parts of the internet that things like, you know, cryptocurrency is an obvious one, where there's a way of exchanging value that isn't based off of that infrastructure system anymore. It's not physical money in a bank that somebody's having to, and there's not a lot of rules around it. But even the other basic thing of just like helping one another through the internet, like, or starting a business for your own, you know, whatever craft you're into, you can immediately put it on the internet and exchange it for value, and you're not having to run through the whole corporatized system of it. I think it's still somewhat regulated, but the more and more we move to a place where there's just no energy for the regulation to even be occurring anymore,
right? It
will be this kind of free-for-all internet. And I just love watching the things. Like I saw a thing the other day, I think I mentioned it to you, that there was an old man that his wife had dementia or something, and was needing to be in the hospital, and the hospital bills were insane. And this guy's been retired forever, and so he literally didn't have enough money to pay for his wife. And somebody else, I think, found out because they were like interviewing him in a restaurant or something, and he just spilled the beans. And then somebody else viewing the video just started a GoFundMe for that person, and they ended up raising like $300,000 for this guy in like a couple of weeks, you know. And then there you go, boom, the guy had the help that he needed.
Yeah.
And that's kind of stuff, like I could see that there was a reality coming that we really do. I mean, I hope the internet doesn't go off and doesn't, because that is like the connected system for all of this to happen. I think we could survive through it without it. And maybe we just jump to a more psychically connected, you know, internet that we can still, you know, exchange and connect to people that way. But that's kind of back to the tech thing, is like that. I see that being the bridge through to a place that was really based on that infrastructure, having this controlled worker bee to keep it up. That actually too does fall when you just think about, like, if everybody is individualizing and disengaging from the need of that, it doesn't have to like crumble and fall in some way in your head where it's like it's a physical thing, like it's apocalyptic. It's actually like nobody's listening to the government anymore.
Exactly.
Nobody's listening to the police. And when you have a bunch of people doing that, like there's no energy for them to control and do it. So it just like waters down and falls away. And I think we are already seeing like the things that Bitcoin and the decentralization aspects of the internet are kind of already holding up a part that we're like moving to, that is this kind of new infrastructure. And it feels like that there could be a smooth exchange to it, if enough people do, really individualize and disengage from that.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think that people, it gets more and more clear to me every day, but I think that we have so much propaganda in our minds about the infrastructure and capitalism and scarcity that it seems a lot more complicated than it actually is.
Right.
I've been saying for decades, like, this shit's all made up, but everyone sees through even to say like cryptocurrency is still based on the premise that we need to pay for things, and we're not there yet. But even just looking at capitalism, looking at whatever definition of capitalism you have, looking at the idea that you need to pay to live.
Right.
And the younger generation is already, and this is the price that generation pays to change the world. Like, they are hopeless when you put them into this thing and there's nothing there for them. The houses are expensive, the hyperinflation, the jobs don't pay money, whatever. It's gone. It's dead. It's already a dead timeline. And you can live on a zombie timeline for a while. So you got people living on a zombie timeline, and then you have the vast majority of Gen Z kind of free floating, but they are saying things and bringing things into the consciousness like, why do we have to pay for housing? You didn't hear anybody fucking say that 20 years ago. Like, literally, why are we paying for housing? Why are we buying land? I've always thought that
as a kid. I never could get my understanding around, like, why am I having to pay for basic things of life? Like, what? I have to pay for water? It's like, just go to the fucking river and grab water,
Yeah.
Obviously, it's poison.
It's poison now.
Dead, but
that's the infrastructure poisoned it.
Right, exactly.
We drive car. Oh, well, without the infrastructure, how will we get these cars? Well, people have invented cars that run on water, but then they got murdered by the infrastructure. Innovation has been crushed and funneled through the system. We would have had free electricity, wireless electricity in every house 100 years ago, 100 and something years ago. Tesla came up with it.
Right.
But why don't we have it? Because somebody couldn't figure out how to monetize it. So we are in a process of deconditioning the ideas of the cross of planning. The commodification of fucking everything was necessary to build that infrastructure in which you have everyone on the same page. We have everyone on the Western model. Everyone in the world is in some version, except for a couple of uncontacted tribes. I feel like I've already gone on this rant here, but is on some version of Western capitalism, and no one's enjoying it, right? And it's just is what it is. It was just the game. But now what has to happen is a window of time in which we start to look at things. We start to innovate. We have to individuate. We have to heal. We have to find ourselves first. And then you start to grab this thing and you look at it from different angles and you go, why is the question, how do we commodify this? For many, many, many millennia, humans lived on the planet without the concept of land ownership. But now we have that, and we all have it like, well, we have to figure that out. We only have to figure that out if human consciousness stays stuck in that place. But you can already see the writing on the wall that that's not where human consciousness is going. These younger people, the ones who aren't getting like severely indoctrinated by their parents, are questioning all of these things. And so as this energy, and this energy is not even fully here yet, as this energy hits the planet, I think we see a massive shift in the way that we look at all of these things and the way that we look at our own personal power. And when we change the way we look at our own personal power, a lot of these things fall. We're seeing it right now with the election, and I didn't have the balls to say this 4 years ago, but elections are they are a ritual. You are participating in a ritual.
It's bullshit.
You are participating in a ritual.
Keep going, I'm going to go get kava.
Oh, I wanted to take a break too. I'll say this first. The government is a system of power outside of yourself that doesn't give two shits about you, and it uses your power, your attention.
Gotta be kind of careful. We're on YouTube.
to create, oh, it's fine, to create the infrastructure, to create I kind of don't care about the YouTube. It's on audio podcast now. You can go find it there if it gets taken down. They tend to not look at you too much if you're not monetized also, by the way.
Yeah, no, true. I would just maybe use some
code words. Okay. You live in an energy harvesting aquarium. And your energy can only be harvested through consent. And every 4 years, you renew a contract to put your energy in to be used by proxy by a war god, who then uses your energy by proxy because you have consented, because you sign a contract every 4 years. And when you think you are choosing your leader, you are actually just choosing to be led. And the circus that they put on, the show that they put on in the year beforehand, is meant to emotionally pull you in to, this is going to happen if you don't do this, but you are literally signing over your sense of agency to two wings of the same bird that literally then just uses your energy to be violent around the world and take from around the world. And then because your energy is connected to that, you feel the negative consequences of that, but you can't quite place it because you were indoctrinated from the time you were 5 years old, when your critical factor wasn't developed and you had to put your hand over your heart and pledge allegiance to this flag. You're so far indoctrinated into it that you don't realize that simply saying no will pull your energy back and this thing will crumble once enough people do it. The thing is that you are constantly being inundated with information saying, well, if you don't do that, then whatever spectrum of horrible things are going to happen, even though it's just such a smart system, if like good cop, bad cop, right? Or just like, okay, you cover the group of people that are afraid of this and I'll cover the group of people that are afraid of this. We'll make sure that they're all fighting with each other in the aquarium rather than ever looking up at the hands that are coming inside the aquarium, right? So I believe that we are very close to people really kind of waking up to that. I think it's getting like cartoonish.
It's happening more and more. And frankly, I think if you can't see that, like it's, I don't know what to tell you, but I think that's like, it's pretty obvious that happens every year, the way that things are promised. And then every time around election, like everybody's so hype and talking about what they're going to do and they're going to bring, and this previous person didn't do. And it is the same thing every time.
Yeah. And then they're at like dinner parties together behind closed doors.
And if you can't see that, we're really like not interested in, we just love having a daddy, having somebody that's like giving us hope that it will eventually change. But it's like just never occurring,
It's so interesting because it's like the things that people, every time you reach a new level of kind of emancipating yourself from the matrix, from being like run by the matrix will show up in whatever form it takes to convince you like, oh, you're a bad person. Oh, you're selfish. You don't care about other people. There are matrix traps, and a lot of them are wrapped up in morality. And a lot of them are wrapped up in like catastrophic future events. I promise you that if the majority of people were choosing personal empowerment, then the reality that we would see reflected back to us would be glorious compared to what we see now. But
yeah, because I think that goes along with the thing that a lot of people don't know, that we're sleeping with this power of, you do create your own reality, and so that how subtle that is, and that if you just did disengage from those things and empower yourself, individualize, the reality reflects the things that you want and see and the way you feel. But like, that's what's so funny, and it's genius to be able to hijack people that way and keep them in this illusion and keep them believing that something else outside is going to change their reality, when it's like, it's just inside of them. You give that temptation of the villain or who you need to fight for and get rid of and put them in jail. Now here's our other savior. And then keep switching that. Like, you play off of those carnal fears and desires and all of that. Like, it's such a subtle genius system of manipulation that, you know, has been passed on again and again through generations. And like, that's what you're dealing with when you're trying to decondition it. It's like so habitual, and it actually is like pulling on emotional centers that make you feel like it's real. And like, this is something I have to fight for. If not, like, my kids won't be able to survive the future, all that stuff. When that very act is like making your reality be that, you know?
Yeah. You're saying that someone outside of you can make the decision for, it's like still routing everything through a disempowered system.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, otherwise one person's going to make this decision and then we're all going to have to do that. And it's like, why do you believe that?
Yeah.
Because it's happened in the past. Okay.
It's such a
Where
difficult
was human
thing
consciousness
to talk
in the
someone
past?
out of that either, without them like having to figure it out for themselves. Because there's all these, you know, written down arguments that everybody has ready to validate why they're still engaging in it.
Yeah.
And that's even become complex. And I think that is still a manipulation from the two hands that are playing the game, you know. But
there are definitely experiences as you're coming out of the Matrix. And I would say, like, the Matrix is the game, and you can play the game from outside of the Matrix, right? So you can play the game in that role play RPG, you're outside of it, you know. So the program exists, you understand how the program exists, you understand how to work with those energies, but you're not bought in, you're not conditioned. And especially, we now have two Matrixes going at the same time. So we got the new Matrix coming in and the old Matrix. And the most of the things I'm talking about is like, if you are still conditioned by the programs of the old Matrix, as it collapses over the next 2 years, you're going to go with it. In and as much as you identify with the old way of being, you're going to go through that death with it. That's why you have people right now that feel like they're living through the apocalypse, because they're still going through those same centers. Like, I want change. Okay, well, we have to change it from within this thing. And it's like, this thing has only been here for a couple hundred years.
Yeah.
It's not an innate part of the human experience. And it is also like deeply fucking corrupt, like deeply corrupt and deeply based on parasitic power dynamics, you know, parasitic energy harvesting. So this brings me to the book I'm very excited about talking about. So why don't we go make drinks? I don't quite have enough drinks yet. All right, we're back from our intermission. I had to eat a quarter pound of hamburger real quick. Why do I keep saying hamburger?
I had to light a Palo Santo because Jess has brought all these demons in the room.
Burger demons?
No, just, you know, the elevated speech you just had brought in a bunch of fucking observers.
Oh, no. This is my first mud water on the reupholstered couch, and I'm a little bit nervous. I wish it didn't have... What's the shit it has in it that you've stained everything we own with?
Oh,
turmeric. Yeah. And I can't do turmeric too hard because it does stain fake teeth.
It's really good for you, though.
It is really good for you. Okay, so since I already dominated this energy, I will continue, or this entire episode, I will continue. You can have the next one. Okay, so I am reading a book, and I feel like I always have to say this because here's why. I always say I don't read because I don't read linearly. And that has been a struggle my whole life, to start a book at the beginning and then read it to the end. I can't. I have to go to the index and find words that feel stimulating and then go back or flip through and look for some pages that, some titles that draw my attention. And so I feel like I always have to say, I don't read books linear because I don't know if there's some shit in a book that I recommend that I actually am oh, I don't resonate with that part, but I didn't fully read it. So I don't know. That's more of that feeling like I need to be 100% right all the time. I will say that this book is one of the closest descriptions I have found to how I think the next few hundred years are going to play out. We'll say specifically in the West. Obviously, all my stuff is very Western because that's where I live. That's what I'm exposed to. but just this book, and this is not a wholesale endorsement for the author of this book or any of her current work. I've only briefly checked in with her now, and nothing I've seen recently really kind of resonates with me. This isn't like a moral statement, but specifically this book nails how I see this playing out. So the author is Penny Kelly, and the book is Robes. And it is a pretty small book, short book. And the premise, I skip all the parts that are about her personal life because I'm just trying to get to the downloads because I'm an asshole. But the premise is she was asleep, I think. She was completely asleep in the 80s. And these little men in robes started coming to her. To the best of my knowledge, she wasn't like channeling on purpose or whatever, but she had a Kundalini awakening, I think. And then these beings started coming to her and they were showing her what was going to come in the transition. And the thing that's really interesting to me about this book is that it's written, so much of it's happening right now that's in this book, but it's written by someone who is still pretty conditioned by the old world and the corporatized, homogenized, cross-planning, whatever. And so the parts where they're telling her things that make perfect sense to me from my perspective and from our perspective even now, and her trying to make that fit in her old reality, I really like. So I made a small list of things that I didn't want to forget to talk about. But she discusses the collapse of the governments around the world and that the nation states would start to break apart. And like huge nations will become like smaller and smaller things. That's 100% how I see it happening. The federal aspect of this giant place that we live will break up into smaller and smaller things. That there will be a short window of time where corporations take over the power position after the government. I think we're already there. I think, and the book talks about it will be because the government had gotten like slowly bought out by corporations without realizing it. And then there is a moment where the government realizes that the corporations have taken over, and then the government kind of falls away and then the corporations take over. Yeah,
I feel like we've been there for a hot minute.
We're there for a hot minute.
It's only becoming now really obvious, but it's been there for a while.
Yeah. I think the government timeline is dead. It's already a dead timeline. And you can tell that by the way that like Congress are all like 150 years old, right? That's all just an indication that there's not new energy coming into this thing. It is literally, they're all bought by super PACs or whatever. They're all bought by corporations. It then says that for a brief window of time, a lot of women will come into the government and try to save it. And the controllers or whatever, I don't even like to say that word because it indicates that they have power, that it will already be a sinking ship, and that's just kind of like throw it to women so you can blame them for whatever, The corporations will rule for a short period of time. They said between 5 and 50 years. I think what is happening right now is that we are in the corporate rule. So there is not a housing shortage. There is all of the single family homes were bought up, which created the increase in home prices. Those houses are just being held right now by investors who are also invested in, or what is that called? Hedge funds that are also invested in all these companies that are making these shitty new construction homes. So if you take all of the better quality homes and just hold them, you create false scarcity, which is all this financial system is false scarcity. The idea of home ownership or land ownership, all of it is just false scarcity, right? And then you force people into these overpriced, shitty new construction homes that are put together really poorly. And then you release the other houses back out, which tanks everyone's equity in their house and their home value. And, it's just trying to force everyone into you will own nothing and you will be happy. That is a power grab attempt from the corporate thing. It's not going to work, but that's definitely what they are going for. I think a lot of World Economic Forum stuff as propaganda to get people to be disempowered. I think that they use conspiracy theorists to spread disempowering narratives about the quote unquote controllers, deep state, whatever the fuck you want to call it. And anyway, we're in the corporate rule, and I think we'll be there for, I don't know, it doesn't feel like a long timeline to me. Talks about how the school system is used to keep us from developing as human beings, and that human beings are meant to be these very advanced beings with a connection to the earth and everything they need loads in that. So like, and I've said this before, like the way this is supposed to operate is if a virus comes through the region, the earth will produce an herb that heals the virus. Like that's how this is supposed to work. Everything you need loads into the reality. But because we're living in like a mechanized machine reality that's like over top of it, in which we believe in scarcity, and we are so obsessed with the material that we think it needs to come from science or corporations. We're all just like possessed by that idea, scientific materialism. We put weed killer on the medicine growing in our backyard and then go into the system and get some thing with a bunch of side effects to help us instead. So, in order to keep us in that delusion, we need to put our kids into the indoctrination system of that illusion. So it talks about that. It talks about the school system and just the idea of sending your kids away. It talks about the way we raise kids in general. I really resonated with. It talks about us making too many humans and how bringing a soul to the planet and creating a human body is actually this huge responsibility that not everyone is made for. And in the future, it will not be very common for people, like most people won't have kids. And the people who do have kids, it's like that's what their purpose is. But then they are kind of raised by the village, although the village means something completely different in the future. And we're already seeing that. We're already seeing like massive people in your generation and Gen Z not having kids. And right now it seems situational because of money or whatever. But I think realistically, the conditioning of the cross of planning was reproduce. Why? Because you need workers for the machine. We were all possessed by something to create a machine. And it wasn't just we were indoctrinated in the they or whatever. I do believe there is a group of souls who understood this cycle and capitalized on it. But that's not why we all did it. We all did it because we were unconscious and being led by the game. And so the game was like, make babies. You know, it's like my parents' generation had fucking 9 siblings and shit. Those people all went to the workforce. So as we stop just replicating human bodies and we become, according to this book, the premise of life becomes developing human potential. And I think this is the 1,000-year awakening that I feel like we go through this very temporary, in the long run, temporary period of time in which we are very conscious. And it sounds like from this, and it resonates with me, that the premise of reality goes from this like separation consciousness rat race, looking for everything outside of you, to remembering human potential. And so over time, we become more and more supernatural and powerful. But it's so much. And you have to read the book, but there is technology in this, but it's very consciousness based. There's a point where she's shown the collapse, and the collapses were already like pretty far into it, according to the things in the book. One thing that does stand out that I think that people don't quite get is that the planet is huge, and every catastrophe will not be experienced by every region. And so you may have some regions experiencing civil war, while other regions are experiencing some sort of plague, while other regions are experiencing natural disasters. It is a period of unrest that kind of undoes the infrastructure that we have outgrown, but it's not universal. I would say COVID was probably the last thing that was universal. And even with that, everyone experienced their own thing in that, right? So some people experience it as government oppression and overstep. Other people experience it as a lot of people passing away. You know, it was different for everybody. A couple of things I loved in the book was the men in robes kind of push back repeatedly on the idea that it is for any of us to decide what other people believe or what other people do. And I would say, to me, a very much individual person, that is at the crux of why we can't find harmony, is because we think that harmony is everyone playing the same note. And we are so conditioned by homogeny and conforming that we think that that's what everyone needs to do. We need to get everyone on the same page from the perspective, and it needs to be my perspective because I have capital T truth and I am the moral authority and whatever. And so everyone's just squawking into the void. And eventually I think people get worn out and we realize, like, we learn to agree to disagree. And as we step into our power, a lot of the things that we're arguing about just kind of become obsolete. And autonomy and individuality just become the baseline of this. And so everything becomes about, how do I honor other people's individuality? How do I deal with the parts of me that want other people to orbit me? Because that's really like a lot of it, babe. Not you, babe, the big babe. We truly all have main character syndrome and think that everyone else needs to orbit us. Or we have the inverse of that, where we are just trying to be chosen by everyone by being helpful or whatever. Like, that's the stuff we're waking up to, is all this disempowerment. And we are really, speaking specifically to the West, but we're really working through boundaries and being in your own energy and what do other people owe me and, you know, stuff like that. So after the collapse happens, people split into smaller and smaller groups. It sounds like the government kind of goes out with a yawn, which I think we're witnessing right now. There are some people who will experience it as they're fighting for whatever, and the people who are fighting for whatever, they will kind of collapse a lot of it in the fighting. I think we're already seeing that. Then there will be several natural disasters that sort of physically separate us. And that has always felt very true to me. I think the topography, I think that's a word, of the world will change. I think we'll see physical drifts of things that are currently continents not being continents, or like large bodies of water changing the whatever. I think that will, I don't know, that might be 50 years away, but that will come as a result of us energetically doing that. I have felt that you're never going to get everyone on the same page and also have them be authentic, so that people will go create new tribes. And the book says, like, many people will go back to tribes that they're like connected to, you know, genetically or ancestrally. I don't know how to say that correctly, but other people will connect with people they feel very resonant with. Some people will connect with their actual physical family. And the groups that split off, there will not be nation states or even, you know, counties, nothing like that. There will just be what's called families, and family will come to mean something different. And that is just a group of people, depending on how much they resonate, like somewhere between 2 and 2,000 people that are connected by whatever they feel connected to. And all of the economic shit will fall away. It just simply won't exist. During this collapse, she said, our entire perception of land ownership will change. And I'm already seeing that. It's simply made up. The deed to the house, the mortgage, it's made up. It's fucking not real, right? And we go, well, if we didn't have that, then what would happen? Well, at this level of consciousness, it would probably be chaos. But if our consciousness increases and our attitude towards these things change, they simply do not need to exist. So after the collapse happens, people gather into smaller groups and have to become incredibly self-sufficient because there is not a infrastructure. So we have to get back in touch with the land. We have to, and when I say we have to me, this is, you should do whatever you feel naturally drawn to do. And you should trust that what you're not drawn to, because like, I'm not drawn to gardening. So I'm just going to trust that whatever I bring to the table is going to connect with whoever is into gardening, which I think is you, right? But as we start to find these like chosen communities, which I don't think we will find until we've done enough healing work and we've become self-aware enough to learn about the mechanisms of projection. Because I think if you still project your shit outward, you are not going to have successful community. You're just going to continue to play out the same stories over and over and over again. So this period of time is meant to be very isolated, I believe, for the people for whom that's how they need to learn. Or you'll continue to try to get in community and just project your bullshit and then think that there's like some sort of conspiracy against you. When in reality, you've just been engaging with the same story for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. So it just keeps coming up. You have to clear your algorithm. Anyway, she describes the way that these families live, and this resonates so much with where we're going. There's one big house, and in the big house is a huge kitchen. And this is in the close future. This is like post infrastructure collapse. There is a big kitchen. All of the food that this group of people eats is grown there. And this is one of those things where I go, and this might be the kind of human design digestion that I have, but to me, I'm like, do we need the infrastructure to bring me fruit from a different country? Like, that seems cuckoo bananas to me. Why isn't there fruit trees on our property? Why aren't there fruit trees everywhere for people to eat from? Why are there only masculine trees giving us all allergies? This is what the infrastructure has brought us at this point, you know? So all the food is grown there. There's a giant kitchen. Someone who loves to cook, mostly works in the kitchen. There are not planned meals because everyone eats when they're hungry. So if you happen to want to eat with some people from the family, you eat with them. If you don't, you do your own thing. There is a big tech room, and there's a lot of stuff around healing. So there's a lot of technology around healing in both the main houses and then the other houses. There's several offices that seem to be connected to the internet and technology. The groups tend to have a quote unquote family business where they bring whatever they bring to the network, but nothing is sold for money. It's just kind of shared for the joy of sharing. You don't pay bills to anybody. There is no government to pay taxes to. There is nothing to buy. There is no commodification. It's simply exchange for the joy of exchanging. There are then smaller houses connected kind of through paths to the big house. And for some people, it's like apartments, you know, it's just kind of built according to what you enjoy. And the thing that really stood out to me was that there are external entrances to every room. And I believe the reason for this is because we are becoming very internal and we are becoming very introverted as people. And that in the future, the priority will be being in our own energy. So like, you know how sometimes you're just like into a book or whatever, and the house is filled with me and the kids, and you keep getting interrupted trying to read the book, or you just want to walk across the house, but you're going to get stopped 50 times by, you know, all the people that want your attention or whatever. And then it knocks you off the track that you're on, and you're not in this house, but in past lives would be called selfish for wanting to stay where you're at. I believe that the selfishness that comes with a heavily individual reality is the individual experience, the internal experience is prioritized in a way that we set up our communities to let the individual do their own thing. And all interactions are extremely consensual. And you already see this happening where like it's weird to cold call someone without texting them first to say, hey, you have space for a conversation. We're learning to like ask first, like, do you have space for me to change the vibe, whatever. The more tuned in and sensitive we get to energy, the more we will build communities based around allowing each person to be in their own energy. Brings me back to the TV thing, where we've got to a point now where it's like, I wouldn't play music that's going to change the vibe or turn on a TV in a group full of people because I wouldn't want to change their energy without their consent. Like if we're not all watching the movie, I would never turn on the TV because I'm aware of the fact that this is a personal thing I'm doing. I should go do it on my phone or with headphones or whatever. Do you have any thoughts so far?
No, I love it.
Okay. She does talk about the lost children, which is an entire generation of people that will reflect back the sickness of the undeveloped. I like how it frames it as undeveloped humans. And maybe it was underdeveloped, but how we have hit a stunting in our growth through what we're doing now, which is just mindlessly working at things we hate, not using our energy, not expanding, not looking inward, having tons of kids, then putting them into the machine, whatever. It's very much framed around like we have to avoid a cataclysm, we have to go inward and get to the work of developing the human like capacity rather than unconsciously going through the world like an NPC. So I believe the lost children that it's talking about is Gen Z, which I don't think they are lost. But I can see that the people who are still very much in the cross of planning are like, why are these kids having failure to launch? Why aren't they finding success? Why can't they buy a house? Whatever. It's like these kids are, and they are like really anxious and depressed, but that's a system thing.
Right.
If tomorrow you change the entire rules to reality and you were like, hey, it's just about creating, it's just about expressing, it's just about being yourself, go pick a house, go make it your own thing, you don't have to pay shit. Gen Z would not be depressed and anxious. They'd be living their best life, but they're here for that.
Right.
They're here for that world. They just were born into the old thing.
So they're going to be temporarily lost because the infrastructure has to reorganize itself for them to actually have a place to be.
Yeah, themselves. It's really sad the way they describe it. And they're, Penny Kelly, when she was writing this book, was still extremely materially minded. And so they had to show her things that I think are more metaphor than anything else, but just showed the children, that generation was really unhappy, and then just shows them kind of like looting or whatever, which I guess we are seeing, but I think the looting is like the least of anyone's fucking concerns at this point. I think one of the biggest things that we will learn is how to cooperate with people we don't like. And I very much took that from this. It didn't directly say this, but you can just tell this is like people go into their own energy and they don't waste their energy on imposing their perspectives. There's a whole section on like abortion, and it pushes back on the notion that there's one answer to any of that, and kind of how silly it is that people evangelize their belief system. And I would say evangelize is different than sharing your belief system versus legislating or like forcing it down other people's throats. Self-sufficiency was huge. And the other thing that really stood out to me, because then it talks about like what it looks like in 400 years. And what it looks like in 400 years is like we really advance. We're still living in that kind of like family thing, but we've really advanced. Like there's a point where the bathrooms are the biggest rooms in the house, which is interesting because we just redid our bathroom to be spa-like, And there's a real priority around taking care of the body. And the bathroom mirror, when you walk into the bathroom, actually doesn't reflect back your material body. It reflects back, it sounds like your aura. And they don't have disease because they're able to see anything building in the system from that. And then they have like this mat that they lay on that reads their energy field. And that's sounds like it's closer to the end of the Cross of Sleeping Phoenix. But I think that any collapse that we see happening now is pushing us back in the direction, or I'm not going to say back in the direction, but in the direction of the human potential. And any losses that we suffer in infrastructure were losses that were holding us back. You know, it's this thing that I believe, which is limitation is an oracle. You know, like, if I lose something, I assume it was holding me back or pulling me in a direction other than the direction that my soul wants to go in. I think I might be like starting to fade. I've maybe talked too much, but yeah, I don't know. That book for me is like so much confirmation of how I see it. And the last thing I'll say about it is Matthias Stefano said the reason that there are no relics from Atlantis is because if you looked at, because we are extremely materially obsessed right now. And if you looked from a materialist, and that means like you think the physical plane is the pinnacle of existence. If materialists watched life in, I keep on saying Andromeda, in Atlantis, you would think there was nothing to it. You would think they would just look like, you know, like an uncontacted tribe just in the jungle doing whatever. I think the people who are uncontacted by this are living in 8D and we just can't see it. Right? And so when all my memories of Atlantis are deeply holographic, everything's really cool and sparkly and like very blue and magic and crystal-y everywhere. But I bet you the vast majority of that was not existing in the third density. It was not the 3D. It was not physical. And so you're not going to find relics from it because there wasn't much happening in that density. And that's what I think the visions that she was being shown from 3D. And so her brain wasn't even able to comprehend what was actually all happening there. But I think for the people living there, it's highly advanced. And they progress from like, they don't need the infrastructure to send things across the country because they create technology first that you can kind of 3D print. Like you can create the instructions for something, trade them with someone across the world. They can 3D print the thing. But in a few hundred years, people can literally just materialize the thing with their mind. And that's what happens when the premise of reality goes from building infrastructure in the physical material plane to being focused on developing the human potential. This comes with a sharp decline in population, in case that's not obvious.
Yeah, I think that's what like a lot of any kind of prophecy thing like this, or looking at the split and everything. It's always the hard truth that it comes with like the population gets, you know, cut down a bit. It seems like it's actually like a natural phenomena.
When's it been this high ever before, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they say like Atlantis had 6 billion people, 7 billion people. That's what I've heard.
Oh, interesting.
But, you know, you can look at Atlantis as like over a long period of time. I think there were, at a certain point, like Atlantis, it transitioned and there were less, you know, and then it peaked and then it went south again and got reset or something. But like I heard it was 6 billion people, and then through a similar wave like this, where there was like a realm transfer from, like, you could say like whatever, we're in third density going to fourth density, or cross of planning to Sleeping Phoenix, where there's that big jump cut, that it got cut down to 14 million, I think, which from 6 billion, that's a lot of people. I mean, it's like, and then it sustained itself like that for however many years, you know. I don't know. Atlantis is interesting because there's so many different conceptions of it, and it's hard to know for sure, because there aren't any relics. There's no, and it's not even really accepted in most culture that it was even real.
Yeah, it's mostly channeled information, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it began with Plato, which was like a pretty decent account of it. That's so far back, though, it's hard to say if that's valid or not. That's been interpreted differently. But yeah, all that stuff resonates to me for sure. I think I'm interested. It seems like it's hard to talk about the potential of like what this transition is and like where we're going from the current paradigm we're in and the perspectives, if it's primarily rooted in like material existence and talking about things in this kind of linear fashion. I think what does come along with it that, you know, I think a lot of people can intuit in a way as well, but it's hard to like imagine it, is that there's these other elements of our consciousness that get widened and expanded that open up possibilities that from here now in the third density, they seem impossible. They seem magical. And we're beginning to understand those things, like the way that you create your own reality. And so your current belief system, and then even the collective belief system, is something that is kind of a limitation, like on what you're experiencing, because anything outside of that little belief system you think is impossible, so it's not going to show up. But
Right.
once that widens and we know that there's a possibility that so and so can occur, it will start to happen. And so like the idea of actually being able to manifest something in front of you very quickly seems like an impossibility. But there's all kinds of things that are starting to occur like that are along those lines of thinking. And so like what comes along with this is this consciousness like expansion, or you could say remembering the powers that we have that have been, you know, clouded out because of the certain game we were playing, that are going to start to come back online. And so many of those that like grounds the reality into this other, like I can see that happening, you know, just the simple things of if you actually can, if you don't have like boundaries in your consciousness of like what's possible, and we get to a place where you can see that time is an illusion. A lot of these things are illusions that we've adhered to that are part of our like core belief system. Things like aging doesn't need to be a thing, really.
Yeah.
You know, like we're all believed that humans live a certain amount of time, and we adhere that to be, we like, you know, ground that into being by celebrating our birthday every year. That's like, we're getting older. And so we all just collectively play that game. But if you could get to a place where you, and I've had this in consciousness, where you like, oh, time isn't real necessarily. Like there's this other perspective, this other place to look at reality as it's this infinite existence. And when I die, I'm just going to be in a different state. And therefore there's not really like, it's just a transition death. But so you start to feel that, oh, time's not real. If we all collectively like understood that and believed it, I could see how you wouldn't age. Like you would sustain this physical like vehicle in longer expanses. Or you could just be like, I now want to change vehicles and move out of it and move into a different one. Things like that I think are really hard to even talk about from this perspective, because of how the language is this kind of fact-based thing, and you can't start speaking about other ways of looking at reality that don't have scientific like proof to it, or you sound crazy kind of. And so I think that's a huge element that like for me makes it it's fun and exciting, and you kind of have to like, we work on deconditioning and healing and growing and like learning new knowledge, but it's like we still won't really know how radical it is until we move into it, and like enough people start to adhere to a belief. I'm just saying like a belief, like this opening up the possibilities of what life can be, that then it becomes kind of very easy to get to the place of not believing in aging and finding yourself being able to oscillate your body into a, you know, a younger state, or not, you're not sick. You don't have to deal with those things, you know, or manifesting things quickly, and elements like that I think are a lot of these channeled information, like it gets into elements of that, but I still think it's just like, it's so hard to conceive from the third density being like way of life, that there's this other thing coming that I think will be like drastically different.
Yeah, I think when we talk about like life will be unrecognizable in 20 years, I mean unrecognizable. Like not the shifts that happened in the last 20 years. I mean, like we will be living in a completely different, well, density, which I guess is a conversation for another day. But all of that untapped human potential is untapped because we don't believe it exists. And so that's what and we're coming out of like such a long slumber of limitation that I like, even myself, I can kind of see it, but it's like every day as I build on my deconditioning journey and I build on my stepping into my own power, I see a little bit more every day of like what is possible. But when the alien showed me levitation, telekinesis, those were a part of our lives, and those were a part of our lives in this lifetime for me. And so our life expectancy increases drastically. It seemed like, I think it was like the youngest people in my generation, which I guess would be me, would live to be like 150. Like, but then there was this death becomes optional, aging ceases to exist, disease ceases to exist in my lifetime. And when I do sessions with people who have like autoimmune diseases and stuff, it's like, I'm not trying to promote like magical pie in the sky thinking, but it never feels true to me that they're going to take that to the grave with them, you know, unless I get the intuition that they're going to leave the realm early. But I just think that so many of these things are a manifestation of the limiting beliefs of the unconsciousness that goes well beyond the cross of planning. You know, I think the cross of planning was the last hurrah of the unconscious reality. And the cross of Sleeping Phoenix is the beginning of a conscious reality. And the more we remember about what we actually are and what we're actually capable of, the less limitation. So I think the first scarcity we will evolve out of is the scarcity that comes with the idea of ownership and government and commodification and like whatever. Like we will be forced out of that, I believe. You know, if you have like several massive hits to the infrastructure, because I think we're learning how fragile the infrastructure is. So you have several hits to the power grid, and you know, in that book it talks about like some of those will be attacks. You know, you got a lot of people who think we're all enemies with each other, so they start attacking each other's infrastructures. Bridges start going down. That came from someone else on the internet who talks about like the collapse of infrastructure, but the bridges are starting to literally break. People will stop flying in airplanes because they will be afraid of getting on airplanes, is in that book. How many of these fucking Boeing things do you think are going to happen until people just stop doing it? Everything will become so expensive that people will start to do things for themselves. The dollar will eventually lose, you know, I think there's a million different ways this could play out, but it's people are kind of forced by circumstances into self-sustainability. People realize like, oh, I need to learn how to do these things for myself. We already like mostly are autonomous medically. You know, and there are a lot of people like this that like can't afford or they get run around by the medical insurance stuff. So people are taking their health back into their own hands rather than seeking the system for it. You see this all over the place. We are already moving towards something that is self-sufficient. And on the other side of self-sufficiency is empowerment. And on the other side of empowerment is what you can do when you keep all of your own power inside of your aura. Right now, people have so many fucking holes in their aura and are siphoning their energy on so many things that of course can't levitate. Of course, you can't remember how to fucking materialize something with your mind. You spend all your energy shadow boxing things that are outside of your control.
Yeah.
You spend all your energy going to a job you fucking hate because you believe that that's what life is about. By the way, you can know that that's not what life's about in your mind and take 20 years to be able to move energy differently. So I'm not telling you to quit your job.
Right.
This stuff's like, you know, we've been asleep for 25,000 years. So you can mentally resonate with a lot of this stuff, myself included, and take decades upon decades to actually like get your entire system to be able to live differently. Your mind will get on board way before your body, or like, you know, there are parts of us that are meant to attract reality that we don't even know how the buttons work on that yet. So it's like, but more and more people are doing it. More and more people are waking up. And then because of that, we're going to see this kind of shift.
So the takeaway is decondition and autonomize.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the takeaway from every single fucking thing I say. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the main theme right now. I'm always amazed at how the deconditioning is not simple at all. It's not like there's the main things, like as we go through some kind of awakening, that there's, you know, the basic deconditionings of things like the government's not real, the power outside of you, all those basics. But I'm just always amazed at how just a simple thing like the birthday thing is like this conditioned element that I experience every year that is like really hard to get my mind out of and not believe that, you know, because it's so ingrained. And that's like a deeper one, but there's just so much of it that you realize how much we've been conditioned to have a limited belief on what's going on. And when you start to have some other alternate experience, whether it's a psychedelic or meditating, and you can tap into like there's so much more, you know, you can then, use your mind to learn all of that. But then it's a whole nother process to like bring that into your daily way of operating in life and ground it into your being, that there's a different way to believe and look at the reality. Is like, it's so hard. There's so many things that daily happen that are anchoring you into that limited belief.
Right.
And being able to find each one of those and slowly get that habit to release is a lot of work. It's like, it is really difficult, but I think it is getting easier the more people do it. You know, the more that we're all kind of doing our own individual work on it, it's becoming easier for other people to kind of release some of those things and see a different way of looking at it that resonates and makes sense. Yeah, the limiting belief thing is just so radical to me. There's like all just through hypnosis too, like the different examples of hypnosis that there's this one in the book where they have somebody, it's called like the third man concept, where they have there's a guy in a room and the hypnosis is there and he puts them into the state, and then he says, there's going to be somebody that comes in the room, but you can't see him. He's going to walk in a minute and you're not going to be able to see him. And so they go through that, and he like wakes him up. The guy walks in and he can see him still. And they're like, okay, it didn't work. So let's try it again. It goes out of the room. And then he says, okay, there's going to be somebody that's going to come in and I can't see him either. You can't see him. So we both cannot see him. And there's something about him reinforcing to the guy that like he can't see him either. That then the guy walks into the room, they wake him up, and the guy walks into the room and he cannot see him. And the guy even like picks up things and objects in the room, and the guy starts freaking out because
he just sees them levitating.
He just sees the things moving around, and he like did not see the guy. And it was because that he like kind of reinforced that person's belief by like adding the other person and saying like, this is, you know, a core belief that we're going to have, kind of thing. But just the fact that that can even work is so wild to me. And obviously that's like putting somebody into a hypnosis state. You're changing their brain waves. It's a little bit more programmable. You can really influence it. and I know you like had hypnosis studying, so or teaching, training, whatever, that you get a lot of this, but like that just shows to me that there is this consensus that we're all together on, that we like believe to be true, and that you don't have to adhere to that. And if you believe something else, like the reality will reflect that. It's that malleable. And
right.
That's what I think. I mean, that really, when you think about everything that we experience in reality right now, like it's so much of it is up for grabs. Like it can change, you know, but it's reinforced by everybody being in on it, you know, and that's what's so difficult to get over. Like I could stop celebrating my birthday every year and try to enforce people to like, do not send me a birthday message because I'm trying to get off this belief that I'm aging, and I would still, you know, I'd still age, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because it's that hard to get off of a collective system that everybody is adhered to. But the power of it, the potential of reality being this really malleable thing is so fascinating to me. And it feels very close. It feels like, I mean, our reality, like, because we have a bit of control, because we're like in consensus belief and always expanding and opening, that our reality does get very magical a lot
in
of the
consensus
times.
You and I in our own thing.
Sorry, yeah. Like we are on the same page about certain things. Like if an energy shows up in the room, like we both can agree that is a possibility and it's happening. And so you can feel that it's like, it's getting there at a certain point. Like collectively we will kind of move into this more malleable state.
A couple of things you said. Okay. So, you know, I got certified as a hypnotherapist in 2008. And in the portion where we were learning about self-hypnosis, they gave an example of a way that we self-hypnotize all the time. So when you open the fridge and the ketchup is not exactly where you thought it was going to be, and then you kind of go into what I would say is victim consciousness about like, there is no ketchup, and you start to go, there's no ketchup, there's no ketchup, there's no ketchup. You literally will erase the ketchup on the other shelf because you have told yourself there is no ketchup. That's how fluid and malleable reality is from the perspective that you hold. So that is like literally our relationship with abundance, with finding love, with, you know, purpose.
I've had that happen so many times when I've lost things. And I was doing this when I was younger too. And I started to notice, I was like, what is this part of reality? It feels like I'm controlling this. But I will have lost something in a moment that I need it really bad. Like it's keys and I'm late somewhere or something. And because it's like a two-sided thing, because I'm nervous that like, I'm not going to find the keys, I'm going to miss the thing. I start ruminating, and then I really can't find it. And I'll look everywhere and I will be sure, I'm like, oh shit, they're gone. And now I can't make the thing, shit. And so I'm putting a lot of energy actually into it not being there because I'm afraid, you know? So but then I will like go back to a place where I'm like, I'm sure it has to be in that drawer. Like I've gone over my memories of where I last left it. It has to be in that drawer. But I just checked like as far as, I efficiently looked through the drawer and didn't see it. So I will go back, but as I'm going back, I will see it in there. I'll go, I know it's in there. I know it has to be in there. And like, I will really confirm it in myself because I'm now past the fear of like being late. And I'll open it up and it's right fucking there. Like somewhere where like I could not have missed that before.
Right.
You know? And it's like as if it just appeared. I've had that happen so many times where I can feel myself just going, tell yourself it's there, make it be there, make it be there. It's funny though, because I've had this, I think with this understanding of reality being that malleable, there's a double-sided thing to it because that's extremely exciting in a lot of ways. You're like, the possibilities of this? Like, if I could really keep practicing that and getting it to a certain place, it's like you really can have this world that is immediately reflected to what your desires are. But on the flip side of that, when you feel like you don't have control of your mind, or you don't have control of your emotions that like then dictate and grab your reality, it's like the opposite is true too. Mm-hmm. It's like, what am I being programmed by? What am I being led by through my emotional state that's out of balance in this moment? I'm creating this chaos. I'm creating this pain or this struggle. And I can't seem to get myself out of this emotional state. So I'm just going to keep perpetuating this fucking thing.
Right.
I think that's what really, like, I've gone through certain parts of my journey of understanding myself and being really thrown off by that, because the weight that comes with it of responsibility, kind of, that like what you are thinking of daily and what you have in your main core belief system of life, like, is what's going to be reflected back at you. So it's like I'm afraid to think of things or think of things that are, you know, dark, or when I'm in that real victim-y world and I can't get out of it, like I feel like I'm never going to get out of it. It's just, I can't, I'm looping on it, you know? And I think that's part of this initiatory, like kind of traversing, you have to get through it to get to a world where we're in a collective where everybody is honest and individualized and in their own power and not telling people what to do and not holding other people responsible for their own life. To get there and have it sustain, like, you got to have your shit worked out. You got to have your emotions regulated, your nervous system in control. You got to not have like kind of vengeance for people and all of those things. Like, you can see why it's so difficult to get to that place, and potentially why not everyone goes,
right?
You know, which is not good or bad. I think it is just kind of like, it's all lessons. It's all where we're at, what we're working through and trying to learn. But like, you can see why there is this like threshold to get to that place. You have to kind of adhere and clean out a lot of the kind of negative, cancerous parts of our consciousness, because you just can't be there. Like, you wouldn't get there. Right. You're going to be in the victim. You're making that reality. Like, you're staying in your own reality. That is this construct. And so it's like, yeah, it wigs me out sometimes. I'm like, God, there's so much responsibility to that. Every negative thought I have now, it's like, it holds so much more weight that I'm like, I do want to get out of it. But it's like, sometimes it's just grabbed a hold of you. And I can then realize, like, I'm doing this.
Right.
You know, it feels like something else made me feel negative, but I have the ability to liberate myself from it, but I'm addicted to this thing, you know?
Yeah.
It's really bizarre.
I like using the language now, not correcting you, but using the language now as empowered and disempowered, because I think the positive negative thing has all that gross connotation from I know you agree, that's why I'm saying it, the New Age movement, kind of like toxic positive, whatever. It really is just disempowered.
Yeah, disempowered thinking is a better term for it. Yeah, there's a lot of things in the languages that we use around these concepts that I'm constantly wanting to try to like reorganize, because they've been commandeered or people misunderstand them.
Yeah, they come to take it on a different meaning.
Yeah, and it's funny because right when one gets introduced, everybody kind of jumps on it, and then it gets misinterpreted and misused, and then you have to, you know, evolve it again.
Yeah, I feel like I have to constantly change my vocabulary around this stuff because it comes to mean something else.
Yeah, like gods is not something I like using anymore.
Yeah, that was something that was so weird when I went back and listened to AOD. I wanted to listen to the tour of the Matrix, but I kept saying, you were a human, now you'll be a god. And that's back when I still had a lot of, I guess, unconscious negative programming around the human experience. And that was like my own conditioning, equating being a human. This was a place we had a rub, right? Because you were like,
yeah,
you know, I was like alien supremacist.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not human.
Yeah.
It's like,
and this, you know, all this was I didn't identify with the collectivist human experience is all it was. Is like, the reason I think the aliens showed up as aliens was because I felt like I wasn't a part of the human experience, but it wasn't the core experience of being a human. It was, I don't identify with the cross of planning. And now, just 3 years later, I have so many more categories of reason that when I'm saying God, I mean creator. And when I say creator, I mean artist.
Yeah, totally. That's what like I equate it now. Like even when you brought up earlier, it's like, oh yeah, we used to say that like we're all becoming gods, and it's like no, you're just the creator of your own reality, a fully empowered, autonomous, individual, creative being. Like is really what it is. But I just think it's interesting the terms we put on everything to try to describe this indescribable element.
Yeah,
and they do have to continually like be evolved and
they are
around.
gods. But I got a bad taste in my mouth with the gods conversation because everyone kept turning it into like a weird hierarchical thing. And then people kept like, we knew people that were like, I'm Ra, I'm this god.
I think that's I don't like it anymore either, because when you look into like all that Giorgiani information I've been rattling on about from the last podcast.
Yeah, you had a couple people were suspecting that it was a Giorgiani.
The reason I didn't mention his name is because he's like kind of a controversial figure, and I didn't want people going off the deep end because the way he expresses on Twitter is definitely out there, and he's got some controversial beliefs, but the information is really cool. And
some of the information. This is the other thing too, is like I for a long time wouldn't even have mentioned this Penny Kelly person, because there is this weird psychosis on the internet of like, if you like someone's art or one quote from them, you have to present a wholesale endorsement of everything they've ever believed. And that's not how anything works.
We're not going to get anywhere if you have to.
You're not going to get anywhere. You're going to live in a stunted echo chamber if that's what you need things to be. So never ever, if we're like, I like this piece of information, that means literally I like this piece of information. This doesn't mean I resonate with this person's.
Yeah, we don't have like a monument at our house. It's like a Giorgiani monument picture of this guru. It's literally just something resonated. It's really cool. And I find it interesting when somebody has like some paradoxical thing, like their teachings are really cool, or this like their study is fascinating and it's liberating, but then they have this other rigid belief system along with it. It's always like, I'm like, how are you telling me all about this, but you think this way too about our current politics or our religion? Like, whoa.
Yeah.
And then I want to dig deeper, because I'm like, how is he holding these two things? Like, it's a paradox. Like, what is the bridge here?
Right. Yeah, it's like you hear a song you really like from someone, and then you go listen to the rest of their catalog, and you're like, interesting.
Yeah.
It's just the one.
Just the one.
Just the one.
But the way he talks about, gods in general, which I think it comes from a lot of different points in our evolution as like society, gods were always, it's kind of in a negative context, because they were always beings that showed up that were, had more knowledge essentially, and like lived in a different kind of paradigm, but they would show up to a less advanced group of people and, do these kind of basic acts in their reality that were just laws of nature, but to the tribe or the group of people that, were not there yet, it looked like magic. It looked like insane. And they utilized that power to control the people. And then, those group of people didn't know how to label and put those people in a person in a like box. So they just said they were gods and they were coming here to save us. And then, they would like influence the culture, give them science and technology, whatever, do that and that was all, on the face of it, something good. But you can see in the longer story of all of this that was, and his idea of them being, actually really advanced humans traveling through time and influencing certain cultures for the long game. There's a lot of this stuff was nefarious. And in the moment, it seemed like some savior was showing up, but it was just because they literally had like alien technology to this culture, and they could not fit that into their paradigm of thinking. The only thing they could do is say that is a god.
Yeah.
And so this idea, like using that term now, like I can see why we were using that and it worked. But from this level of thinking now too, it's like the opposite. I would never want to use that term, because it actually has been utilized in a lot of this in a nefarious way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't remember what like drew us away from it. other than people like going into psychosis over it. It was a helpful, empowering revelation for me to go from the monotheic, like the one God belief, into the million billion different fragments of God.
And that we're all gods. We're all an expression of it. So I think it was actually useful for that time, that little transition. But then, just like everything, it then starts to be misused and starts to get misunderstood. So we drop it and start using a different thing. And I think that's probably even happening now. In a year, we're going to be like, okay, the cross of planning thing's actually now corrupted. So,
right.
Whatever it is.
I'm running out of gas.
All right. Yeah, we've been going for like 3 hours.
Yeah. Where can people find you? Oh, we have already established that. Mark something. Google Mark Pontius
Acuity is where you can book sessions with me for creativity coaching or projector human design stuff, because I'm a projector. Can help give advice, things that have worked for me. But in general, just creative, like if you're trying to figure out how to be your authentic creative self, whether to be in the system or not, how to utilize all that, anything around that, I really love talking about and can help if you ask.
And you are potentially going to make your own Patreon, just a little free Patreon to maybe do live streams?
Yeah, I feel like I'm being pushed to do that. That might be another avenue, an outlet that would be fun for me and potentially helpful for other people as well. Something like that, maybe a Patreon live, maybe just more active on social media, on TikTok or something, or a combination of the two. But yes, stay tuned, I guess.
And then the song for this podcast thus far has not been put up. I think I'm going to start taking songs from Safe. Should I not tell you this? I'm going to start taking songs from your most recent album and putting them on the end.
Yeah, I guess you could do that too, because this is more public. So yeah, that's fine. I'll put the one that's on there now. I'll eventually put it up on Spotify.
Yeah, you like to wait a couple years.
Yeah, until it's irrelevant. Nobody cares.
Yeah, that's what you did with the AOD songs. But Suit Nop on Spotify or wherever you listen to music. Phage 1 and Phage 2 have a lot of music from AOD.
The old AOD.
And
then on Instagram, it's Suit Nop with a 5.
But you're maybe changing that.
Yes. 5 Oot Nop.
Just go to mine, which is Jessa Reed, and he's tagged in like all the recent posts.
And if you're out there and you have the Instagram name Mark Pontius, please give it back. I would like to have it back.
That's so annoying. Just a little fan page, an abandoned fan page from back when you had fans.
Yeah.
I'm Jessa Reed on Instagram. If you go to jessareed.com, you can find whatever. I'm not doing a lot of sessions anymore, but you can find them there. I'm most active on Patreon. There's a free tier, and then there's 4 other tiers now. I feel like I'm living on Patreon. All right, that's it. Love you. Bye.